Hey, welcome to the Open House Show with me, Jesse Meadow. We've got the first show of 2021. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to the new year. We're very excited about this year. And before we get started with our show's guests and topics for the future and moving on with our spring side of the episodes, we wanted to take a moment to bring Chris on. And really just have him and myself go back and forth on some reflections from 2020 and obviously some expectations and some things that we're excited about moving into 2021. We did get some feedback from some of our previous guests so far this season on some of the reflections that they may have had. And we're going to bring those up and talk about those on the show as well, because the different perspectives are always insightful for us. So without further ado, there's Chris, our old friendly face.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Excellent. So, jumping right into it, obviously we don't have to go through, the narrative of someone's journey and the little plug of someone's school. It's just us.
You want me to talk about myself for 15 minutes?
No. We've heard it plenty of times by now. For me, obviously, the most obvious one for me, when I'm reflecting on this year, and I even look back into, March, April, which seems like a decade ago, not just some months. But the virtual event, and that could be anything from Zoom meetings, just trying to stay involved with everyone on campus or with families. You're talking open houses. And how creative schools got. We've had a few people on this, on a few guests on the show that talked about some different ways that they've done open houses and campus tours with their virtual events. I think that the video departments of every single school in the nation was revamping their 360 tours and whatever they could possibly do to get families, or current and prospective, inside of the buildings more than they normally would, because physically they just weren't able to be there. So, for me, obviously, my biggest reflection on is the virtual events. Chris, you could probably elaborate a little bit more, but I got to be honest with you, I don't see most of that going anywhere. And I do feel that the physical presence on campus is by far the most important thing on a campus tour, being able to feel that environment, experience it firsthand. That's something you're not going to get in a video. But as we transition, it's 2021, we're talking international families, boarding schools, even domestic when they're out of state. Sometimes it's not always possible. That virtual component, especially since the pandemic forced everyone to try to ramp that up and renew that within their own programs. I don't see that going anywhere.
No, I don't. I mean, I think, the more we reflect back, I think all of us would just have this anxiety of let's get to 2021, right? Like, let's just get there. Let's cross that imaginary date and line, right? And let's just get there. I think as we reflect back on 2020, this was not once in a generational type of year. This was a once in a century type of year, right? With the way the pandemic happened, everything from our economies, not just in this country, but across the world. And of course, the political ramifications of things that happened last year will be felt as well. And so, when you sit back and you think of like, what were you thinking and what you thought the year was going to be in January and where it ended, like nobody would have predicted that. And if you did, you need to, go out and play the lottery or something, because you're missing your mark. I think one of the things when you have something like this that's so seismic is it forced a lot of industries, a lot of companies, and particularly if you're looking at K through 12, it forced them to embrace technology, right? It forced them to do a lot of the things that they should have frankly been doing over the last few years, right? As the page is turning on who their audience is. And I think, at least speaking for the clients that we've worked with, they've engaged this generation of parents in a way that this generation is used to engaging, right? Used to absorbing content, used to making decisions. The old day of looking at a view book or getting a view book mailed to you, whatever, then going to campus and going through that decision. We talk about this a lot of times. By the time they do a tour, they have already worked themselves through that funnel a lot further than, say, 10 years ago. And so I think, schools that are embracing open houses, online tours, online communities, and meetings, I think are positioning themselves very well for this next decade ahead of us. And I think as we reflect back from a positive standpoint, I think 2020 will be a year that transformed the industry in a lot of positive ways. Of course, they had from March to May felt like an eternity of what the hell was going to happen. And so they had to make a lot of decisions, a lot of choices that they never had to. But I think looking back and reflecting back, I think you're going to be in a position where 2020 was a very transformational year for this industry. And I think a lot of it, to your question, will stick around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's not even getting to, we'll talk about the demographic a little bit later. And I know we have another guest next week where we're actually going to be talking a lot about that's the topic, is that demographic shift and their needs and meeting that, especially with the digital age. But, not even so much for the admissions department, but in schools in general. I mean, you're talking organizations, their conferences, those professional development opportunities, those ways to build every year and find the latest trends, all of that virtual. And we'll talk a little bit later in the show, but there's been a lot of opportunity, value opportunity for schools with these virtual events. And while we want to get back to some sort of normalcy, I just don't see, profitability wise, it's going to be in the best interest in certain situations to keep that virtual component so that they're able to engage in different ways. And it's transformational. I mean, it seems like such a small, by definition, huge word, but considering what happened and what everyone lived through and still living through, such a small thing. I mean, everyone's lives was turned upside down. There were changes made from top to bottom in every aspect of someone's life, every business, every industry, everywhere in the world. And I don't see that going back. I think that to your point that you said earlier, I think that schools are starting to see the benefits of that digital landscape, and whether that be outreach or whether that just be utilizing video and digital things in different ways, including in the classroom. That it forced them into a situation that they're now realizing the value of. And I'm not so sure that like we both agree that, you're going to be able to turn away from that. I mean, it forced you into that situation, and now you're seeing the benefits of it in a lot of different ways.
I would just say, I think it's also a good reflection of this industry and why we love independent schools and the value that we got. I mean, you did see a circling of the wagons around these institutions. Surprisingly, giving was up in a lot of institutions, which you would think would be the opposite, given the economic situation. That kind of call to action that we need to kind of circle the wagons and be there for our students and help make sure that we don't lose the gains we made of the last decade. That kind of thinking and notion, I think, really kind of was a pleasant surprise, and also helped with any enrollment shortfalls that happened from schools that didn't get COVID bounces, that weren't in states that didn't have a lot of restrictions on public schools, but had a lot of restrictions on public school, but not private. And so like you see a lot of really good fit narratives that come out of 2020. Like I said, I think we all wanted to get past 2020 because it was such a terrible year in a lot of different ways. But I think you look back, there are some bright spots. And I think the schools that look at and companies or people in general that look back and see the positive aspects of it, I think are going to come out of 2020 with an advantage over a lot of other people, because they see how adaptive they can be, how they were able to rise over, like I said, a multi-generational situation. And so I think there's a lot of pluses too when we look back on the 2020, not just the negatives. And when you notice the COVID boom, and you start to realize that there was, I can't remember, and I guess maybe I could read up on some history before, but I can't remember that many opportunities where, the private school market and the public school market
was directly compared so perfectly next to each other. And that, everyone's like, oh yeah, private school is always better. We can't afford it, or this or that. Now it's either you're in class or you're not in class. I mean, how are you handling online learning? Is it just haphazardly thrown together because it's the nature of the beast? I can't do what I can, or we have to add, performance measurements. We have to really buy in. We're going to get the entire campus to buy into that method that you see in private schools, and that value was added to families all over the country. Where that direct comparison and that need. That hasn't really been there before. I mean, that was a huge
for sure.
For them.
I think let's be fair to the public school system too. I mean, there's a lot of built-in advantages that independent schools have. The public school system doesn't. I mean, just think of the public school system like a big, ship tanker, right? Trying to turn and maneuver versus a, power size boat, right? That's very nimble, agile, can make very quick adjustments. Yeah, you're gonna sail around those big boats all day long. And so I think you saw a lot of that issue, right? Politics infused into the situation, bureaucracy. How do we handle this? How do we do proper, how do we protect the teachers as well as the students? And you had a lot of these competing type interests that played into it. So I think you also were able to see the independent school side of being able to be nimble, be quick, and be able to kind of adapt on the fly without, having to deal with a lot of external situations. Whereas, principals and administrators in public schools, had a lot of hoops to jump above their head. Whereas, heads of school and their board were in simpatico and they were just ready to make the adjustments, do it, try it. If it didn't work, they changed it immediately. You didn't have to go back up, back down.
Right.
And so I think there are a lot of things there as well. So while, yes, there was a lot of advantages there, I think this did show that, independent schools are a little bit more versatile and adaptive when it comes to situations like this.
You're so nautical with your analogies. You sailor you. And that brings me, talking about the value a little bit, bringing up some of our reflections from some of our previous guests. J.P. Burlington was on a few weeks ago from the Trinity Pauling School up in New York. And, he was, I asked them, what was a reflection that they had. And he was bringing up, the resilience that schools have and campus wide. I felt like the theme was more of a campus wide thing. When you talk mostly, our show is obviously dedicated more towards the enrollment side of things. But when you look at a school holistically, you're talking in March transitioning to online learning for the rest of the year in a lot of cases, not knowing what the fall was going to look like. Then you get a fuller picture. Some schools all virtual, maybe by choice, maybe not by choice, depending on ordinances. Whether you're on campus or not, you have that virtual component. I mean, the amount of effort and time and energy that was put into, programs, curriculum. You're talking, just the social distancing, setting up the classrooms, the purchasing of the plastic shields, your maintenance department, your custodial department, the new routines that they're going to be having daily, the temperature checks, all the administrators. Before you'd worry about uniform policies or, do they have a book? And now it's, put your mask on. What's your temperature? The amount of added checks. And I would imagine there was some grunting, but generally speaking, at least from my experience in independent schools and private schools, we do it for the kids. We do it for the families. They're able to be there. We do it with a smile. And, to have that whole, campus-wide initiative in their areas and them successfully put it through, that's a huge accomplishment. And I think that, schools should be very proud of that. Obviously, they're not out of the woods yet. We're still dealing with things. It's not under control. Just because it's 2021 doesn't mean that all is forgotten and everything's good. But that progress, that stability, it's a lot more. It's there a lot more than it was because of those efforts, because of that implementation, and because of the thought sharing between organizations and schools to make sure that they know what's working and what's not working and implementing it in that way. Kristen, Mariotti from the Stoneleigh Burnham School, she was actually talking about how it got everyone out of the status quo. And they had to be creative. They had to focus on different things and we see that on our show, depending on what part of the nation you're coming from or what situation. Some people had boarding issues, some people didn't. Some people had public school issues, some people didn't. So, your strategies and your creativity of what you're trying to do varies depending on where you're from. But I think overall, everyone had to be more creative. Everyone had to get out of their comfort zone to try to get through this and to try to maintain, where they were with enrollments or with projects or with the student bodies, getting them back in class. Those safety measures that were put into, there was a lot more focus on equity. When you're talking about schools going virtual, now we're talking about, you can control the environment that is within the school. But when you're having to teach a community now that is at home or has this capability, that capability, sometimes you start looking at the equity factor. How are we reaching these families? How are we working with these families to make sure that they feel valued and they're not getting left behind? What say you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of inflection points throughout 2020 for institutions. I mean, once you got past the panic part of, oh shit, what are we going to do, right? Like, yep. you should get past that, and figure out a plan and a strategy. I think a lot of schools were able to look at, what's working, what's not, how can we do better at this, to add value, to kind of show that additional, benefit of independent schools. And so I think Kristen's insights are pretty good there, from a fact of, status quo kind of went out the window for a lot of these schools because they had to be adaptive. They had to be, thinking outside the box, which, a lot of these schools we talk about often is that, they're rich in tradition and culture, and they get stuck there sometimes. And so I think this has allowed them to kind of evolve a little bit and really get into, to my previous comments, more of a digital focused, enhancing their technology and capabilities. And so, yeah, I think she's spot on. It really had turned the status quo on top of its head.
Yeah. And a lot of times, you don't even know that you're in your comfort zone. You don't even know that you're in the status quo. I mean, we always, not to quote my old boss, but, the theme of lifelong learners. You're always trying to do those extra things that you continue to learn and continue to grow, either as a professional or as a person. This forced that issue, and I think that the habits that have been built since March, really, are going to continue to go through. I think that not just the virtual things, but finding new ways, being creative, seeing this new opportunity here, striking on this, being more able and willing to take chances and to try new things. That I think those habits are going to be going through with us until 2021.
Let's just be real too. It checked the egos. There's a lot of egos in independent schools. It checked them. No one's handled a pandemic before. So you couldn't sit in that room and say, well, I've handled this before. I've got the best idea on the face this, because no one's done it.
Right.
And so it checked a lot of egos in those meeting rooms and boardrooms. And so you were able to face some of the issues that you've been dealing with, their status quo issues, and really been able to address them. And so like I said, I think we'll look back on 2020 and look back on it as a year that transformed a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And I think it transformed a lot of things for the better, quite frankly.
Yeah. Tyler Hart at Villanova Prep got back to us, and he actually he brought up a very interesting one that might be forgotten, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up, and I think it's a great point. But upon reflecting on this past year, he wanted to give kudos to parents. And you think back on it, and it was all so micro focused on, at least on our end, on enrollment processes, school processes, administrative procedures, what things look like, opening of school, things of this nature, curriculum, virtual classes. But in the background, you have these parents that are having to do things that would just never be thought of, until you were back in the 1700s, homeschooling or something like this, when it just wasn't even available. I mean, the type of things that parents have had to adapt to with their children, hats off to them. I think if anyone's ready for things to get back to somewhat of normalcy, it's definitely going to be the parents of today. I mean, I've been very lucky with my kids in childcare. They're not really at the school age yet, but I've heard some horror stories. Kids getting left behind. They're getting homeschooled or they give up, and then we'll talk about this on a future episode. But you're talking kids that are losing credits. Forget if they're just academics. Now you're talking collegiate acceptance. You're talking athletic ability, eligibility. There's a lot of things that have been thrown into disarray on the family front because of this pandemic, and specifically revolving around school. I mean, how are you going to balance school and work at the same time when your kid's in the living room? In March, it was new. It was what we had to do. We all get over it. But, through the summer and through the fall, that starts to fade a little bit. And
it made TikTok a lot better interesting to watch.
Oh, TikTok. How big would TikTok be without the pandemic?
Okay, let's be honest. Okay, I'm going to sound old, but it wouldn't be that big among our age demographic. It was still pretty big amongst I would say 12 to 24 age group. But yeah, TikTok took off because everyone was trapped in their house. They're working from home. They're also working from home. They're also playing teacher, to your point. And then kind of figuring out how to juggle all that. God forbid, that if they lost their job or trying to figure out the economic situation, or, God forbid their family or themselves had COVID. That's the other thing too, as we reflect back on 2020, not really pertaining to the industry, but, the loss of life. We have not had this large of loss of life in this country since World War II. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you and I were not around for that. And so we have nothing to compare that with. But, when you think about it, it's staggering in that. And so, looking back on 2020, we can't think about how many lives have been affected, whether by loss of life, loss of income, loss of family member. Some things can't be replaced. And so, looking back on that, that's, obviously something to give parents more credit is they were juggling all of this, right? And still being able to try to provide an education so you didn't lose a year. Obviously we'll talk more about what are the reverberations from, loss of credits or things of that nature. And so I think there's schools and other associations are going to have to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to that. You might see waivers. You might see a lot of different things that come down to maybe help alleviate some of this. But, we're not out of the woods, right? Yeah. We turn the page, we turn the calendar. We're supposed to get 20 million vaccines in this country. We're at 4.2 by the end of December. And so we're not out of this woods by any means. And so, as schools are looking to next school year, obviously, as we get through the summer into fall, we'll be in a lot different place. Hopefully we've reached that, that 70 to 80% vaccination mark that's needed for that herd, immunization. So, there's a lot of questions still up there. We're not out of the woods by far. And so I think looking back and giving kudos to parents, I think is important.
Yeah, and when you were talking about kind of the deaths and things like that, it made me think. It reminded me of the pivot with private schools and a focus. Where Kristen was talking about, made you focus on equity a little bit. I think another piece to that is that it did make schools focus, if they hadn't already, on really ramping up that emotional support systems that they have at the schools, whether that be virtual, the counselors. I know at several schools that we talked to, the counselors were still available for virtual conferences. The kids that were back on campus, they hired more counselors to be in that role, because the emotional toll on this, even if there wasn't a death in the family, is nothing to joke around about or to take lightly. A normal student, there's story after story and study after study about the stress levels that students of today are going through for a variety of different reasons, especially depending on the family situation. Now you add this component where I'm away from my friends, I'm away from the fun parts, of life, of the experience. We can't play the same way. The different ways that you've been able to have to adapt sporting practices and games. Even at a time this year, that was still unknown. Are we going to be able to play? Am I going to lose a year of the one thing that I love most? So I think the social emotional toll that the kids have had to go through, and I think that generally speaking, independent schools, private schools have done a very good job of focusing and pivoting on that. And I think that the foundations that they're building because of this pandemic, that is only going to benefit them for years to come.
Yeah. Well, I mean, getting feedback from obviously our clients and administrators across the country, they over and over have been extremely proud of their students and how they've been adaptive, how they have embraced the new guidelines put in place, social distancing, testing, things of that nature. And so, I know I'm kind of being the half full guy on this show today, but you got to give credit to them as well from what they've been able to adapt to and overcome. And also, now I'm being a little bit more pessimistic, but I feel bad for the seniors too. That kind of had their.
Oh man, you went there.
I know had their senior year cut short. I'm reflecting back on my time. Senior year was a blast and was one of the best for me. And so trying to imagine that, and schools bending over backwards to try to give them some kind of anchor points to their senior year. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges. I mean, we could, I'm sure this could go on for a long time of us kind of just having, oh yeah, what about that, or what about that, and so I think there's a lot of that things that came out of it that we'll look back on, kind of that class of 2000, and how they approach this, adapt them. A lot of seniors are now taking gap years. Which I necessarily don't think is a bad idea given the situation. It's not like you could have a typical college experience. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, class of 2020, there definitely should be, and we'll see how this one ends. Again, like we're not out of the woods. But, this class for sure, 2020, that alumni budget should be bumped up for some events that they bring back on the campus, you know what I mean? And get them involved again and give them something that they may have missed, previously. Another thing that, I reflect on it, and, obviously this was our inaugural year as a company, and we were getting started, and, it was, we wanted to be able to promote, private schools and really share our experience and get schools, bring them up to speed to the digital age of today and make it easier for them to keep enrollment high and offer more students the opportunities that, frankly speaking, we had. And that all comes from being able to get out there, make the community aware of your brand, aware of what values you have, and what students and families can get out of an experience at your school. And I've been, obviously we saw a need for that, but it's still surprising to see, how well those campaigns went. And how much it really benefited. I mean, over the summer, the campaign we had in Arkansas, you're talking 108% year to year with new student enrollment. We were seeing across any of our clients, we were seeing higher than industry average percentages of click-through rates. So, you could see that there's a void in that space because of the interactions that you're getting from families. They're used to seeing other ads like this. They're used to seeing other branding like this, other information given to them like this, but not from schools. Definitely not from K through 12 schools. And to see those numbers and those success stories come in, not that it was a huge surprise, but it was really satisfying to see that was working in that direction.
You know what it was for me, Jesse? If I could just be blunt. A huge damn relief. All right. Because because we took a lot of industry experts, obviously, from different parts of digital advertising industry, And, you and I talking through our lengthy conversations of time before we launched Statecraft Digital was, why are we not doing this in K through 12? Yes, we're doing Facebook marketing, but, it's not really done at the level of expertise that other companies are doing it right. And plus, there's a dime a dozen like Facebook experts out there would do your Facebook and Instagram. But, social media is only half of the internet, right? Of like how you reach, consumers, whether it be through programmatic, CTV, things of that nature. Are you developing content that's fit for digital consumption, versus like, are you still doing ads that you would put in a newspaper, right? Or on a direct mail? And so, we knew in every aspect, based on what we knew and the team that we developed, that we were going to be successful. But when you jump off that ledge, and you should be speaking about this more than I should, Jesse. I mean, you jumped off the ledge and we're like, we're going to do this. This is a value that we can bring to the industry, help, take the digital expertise that we have and tailor it to our knowledge with K through 12 industry. And it's been a success. And so I think there's a lot of things. Once again, you look back to 2020, and we're going to look back at this helped kind of speed this up. I mean, of schools embracing digital advertising, making it a more prominent, part of their overall marketing, I think is going to be crucial. It's not just a throwaway thought of, let's get some Facebook ads up or boost this post. Like, how do we take a comprehensive approach? We doing the audits for these schools, of kind of giving them a firm understanding of where they are technologically. It's been an eye-opening for a lot of them, right? Of kind of the seeing where they're at, what they could be doing, what are the advantage, what is the advantages cost-wise, which I think raised a lot of eyebrows, right? Especially as we were going into or in the middle of COVID. And then I think the fact that we were able to kind of, be able to develop a lot of techniques and tactics pretty quick that were specialized for this industry, I think was very important on that front as well. And so looking back, I mean, digital advertising is kind of the end-all be-all now for this generation. Of course, there are some other mediums that you can go into to kind of help amplify brand awareness, things of that nature. But if you want to be targeted and precise to this generation of parents, I mean, they're consuming technology on digital platforms. And so, I think we saw a lot of good successes. I think more importantly, our clients saw a lot of successes or more importantly, saw the benefit of digital advertising, right? And why it should be more of a active part of their marketing strategy and plan. And so, I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts on this, but I think the overall arching thought is that, I think that the industry took a pivot, and they took a pivot more in the digital marketing than they have in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, we were also in the election cycle. So,
I didn't notice.
You didn't. Well, you were the one. You got digital ads for, I mean, everything. I mean, it's just it was an essential piece of our culture. And it's going to be, and now that the politics side is kind of quieted down, at least for now, that space opens up for a lot of other opportunities. And the other thing that I reflect on, and this kind of leads into the next part of where I'll try to transition this smoothly. What our expectations are and excitement for 2021. I liked, when we were discussing, you're trying to find a mission for, your social media outlets and, focusing it on creating this show, bringing it on industry experts, especially from all over the country. So you get regional expertise, you get years of experience talking about so many different enrollment subjects. I mean, this has been so much fun. And when we most of the people that we get on the show, they've done traveling, whether it's for conferences or boarding schools, obviously for school fairs and things. I mean, you talk about those interactions you have with colleagues. You talk about those conversations that you have when you're shooting the breeze, and talking about enrollment or talking about your school or talking about this, and to be able to still have that essence and still have that thought sharing of ideas, even though we're not able to travel, even though we're not able to meet up. in the real world. It has been a real nice touch, and transitioning to what I'm hopeful for in 2021. I'm very excited about the lineups that we have, some of the revisits that we'll have, the conversations we're going to discuss, and generally just promoting private school ideas, things that are working well, things that aren't working well, what we're seeing in different parts of the nation, keeping everyone up to date, as much as we can. In the interim, you go to those conferences where they have, the now it's webinars. You get a plethora of information, and it's great to get those updates. You stay on top of trends. I mean, when the NACE trend book comes out, it's like, oh, here we go. We've got everything for the year. But to have those weekly updates, to have those little insights about what's going on in New Jersey or Massachusetts or California or Arkansas, timely, on the moment. What are you seeing there? I want to try to add as much more value to that as well, because it's such a nice thing to have going on in the background of all of our lives, while we're trying to navigate these troubling times.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm very excited for the year ahead, and really the next 2 years. I think you're going to see a transformation in this industry. One of the things we've talked about is kind of the antiquated approach that a lot of independent schools have. And to quote Mark, what's it called? No, I can't quote him. The random acts of marketing.
That's right.
Which I think is kind of, one of the quotes that stick in my head with this is I think a lot of schools do implement the random acts of marketing. And so kind of getting them to take a more holistic annual approach to things, and not only recruitment year over recruitment year, I think it's helped them understand the value of digital advertising and where it could be leveraged. And so I think, starting the show obviously was a way for us to kind of help, to your point, kind of bring on industry leaders, have a forum for thought sharing and ideas. And I think that we're going to continue to do this for the year to come and continue to bring value. Whether people work with us or not, I think that we're here to kind of help, get thoughts and ideas out there to help people do their jobs. Because at the end of the day, we believe in the mission of independent schools and their ability to really affect the next generation of leaders. And so I think that we've got exciting year ahead. And frankly, I am beyond looking forward to when it's safe to do so, to be able to travel, to be able to interact with people. I'm definitely missing that after this year. It's funny, before this year, I would complain and bitch about having to travel, but there's a certain element of it that you miss in interacting with people and engaging with people. And so I am looking forward to that in 2021, and being able to actually meet our clients in person, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, in this day and age, talking and pitching over Zoom is took some getting used to. But I think that's another thing that you're not going to put back in the bottle. I think that, some travel is obsolete now. You're not going to have to do it. Like, let's just jump on a Zoom call and talk, right?
Right.
People comfortable with it. They're used to it now. Definitely one of the quotes of the year, you're on mute, and will continue to live in progress, for sure. And so, yeah, I'm excited to get back out, travel, meet some folks, continue to build relationships, share ideas. And also, more importantly, we see it as a mission here at Statecraft or Schoolcraft Digital, is to really kind of, take that antiquated enrollment and bring it up to speed and help these schools get more value out of the money they're spending.
No, I mean, that's definitely the focus. I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but, taking that enrollment funnel, as many as we can, digitizing it, getting it to where they can have ease of access, and really offer an enrollment process that our generation expects. It's how it's done, and it's more. It's not so much as a nicety and something that we need to move into. It's more of an expectation. And with that, obviously, the trading of ideas and the forming of relationships, the building of relationships, and that travel piece, man, meeting up with people. You're right. Like that's something that is on the horizon, and hope it's closer than further away for sure. I know that there's tons of colleagues that feel the same way on that. So, but with that, I think we've done a good piece reflecting on the year. I think that about sums it up.
Time to put this year to bed.
Yeah. We got the start of the second semester for most schools, if not all schools, that at least that we deal with. So, best of luck with your first week. I'm sure it's going to be packed full of
re-enrollment.
It's
I'm already getting emails.
Yep.
From Noah's school. Already getting.
Got to get them re-enrolled. So we wish everyone the best of luck at this first week and with the rest of the second semester. Stay tuned, obviously, on Mondays at 1 o'clock, where we'll be bringing you some more insightful information and different topics. Be sure to check us out on Facebook. We do have our YouTube channel that you can subscribe to and get all of the updates and information on the Open House Show. We hope to see you soon, and thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great start to the year.
Happy New Year, everyone.